Hello everyone, welcome to the another video on Spring Cloud Kubernetes series. So in this video, we will be looking into the API gateway. We already have deployed two microservices. One is a config server and Eureka server. And in this video, we will be looking into a API gateway. So API gateway is built on top of the Spring Web Flux, or it can be developed on it is also available on Spring MVC as well. Okay, and the API gateway is an effective way to route the APIs, and also it can help all the microservices to implement cross-cutting concerns like security or monitoring or resilience or any other things that we need for all the microservices that can be put it into inside the API gateway. So let us start looking into what API gateway is and what are the how we can create the API gateway. So if we look at the POM file of the API gateway here, we can see that we are using the starter gateway. Also, we want to register our API gateway with a Eureka client. So here I have added the dependency of the Eureka client as well. Now, if I check the main class, so it has nothing specific related to the API gateway registering, and also in the some configuration later on we will be using the ticket and flights and passenger. So when we integrate this with all the microservices, we should be able to route our API through API gateway, and we will look into it later on when we are coming to the Spring Cloud for flight services and ticket services and passenger services. So the property file for API gateway, I'm using the server port is 8765. Then the application name. See, all these properties we need to put when we are creating the pod as an environment variable. So Spring application name I'm giving as a ticket service API gateway. Then the Spring Cloud Gateway Discovery located enabled true, so it will be able to locate the services. Okay, and all the microservices, the URI that gets created, I want it in a lowercase, so I have kept it as a lowercase, service ID as a true. Also in the Eureka instance, preferred IP address true, and Eureka client fetch registry true, registry with the Eureka, I want to register with the Eureka this API gateway, so I have set it as a true, and the URL of the service URL for the Eureka, so this is going to get registered with the Eureka. So when we are using with the local host, we have to use the local host, but when we are using into the Kubernetes, we have to use the service name. In this case, the Eureka service name is kubectl get services. The service name is going to be ts Eureka service, Eureka server service. So when we are using this service URL default zone, we have to use it as a, instead of the local host, we may have to use ts Eureka server service. Okay, so first of all, I want to put all these properties that I'm going to use into the config map. So I'll go here and add all the common properties into the config map. So the API gateway, the number of properties are something around these many properties, right? So API gateway, Eureka client, service zone URL, service URL default zone that I was showing, that we are going to use the service name here. Then the fetch registry true, the client registry with the Eureka true, and the client instance preferred IP address. So these are all the property files that we are property that we want to use, and that I have defined into the config map. When we create the manifest file for the deployment object, we will be using these uh, properties from the config map. So now let us look into how we will be creating the deployment object and the service object. So I have created a API gateway YAML, and I have pasted some code here, and let us look into it one by one. So the deployment API version as apps v1, and the kind is deployment. So these are all the very common property that we have used on all the manifest files for the deployment. And the specs replica count, again we are using one. The selector is TS API gateway, and the same name we are using it into the specs template metadata label. So this is the same as this one, right? Now inside the specs we are creating specs for the containers, that is container name TS API gateway. Then the image that I am using is cup of Java Tech ticket service API gateway. Again in the API gateway I have created a Docker file. This Docker file you can use to build an image, or you can use the same image that I have used. And image push policy I want to pull the image whenever I am creating a new image. So I am giving the image pull policy as always. Then the port is 8761. So here the port is 8761 that I am using here. Then if you remember, we have defined some properties. Spring application name. So this is Spring application name here, Spring application name, and from where this property is coming from, the config map application config map, and the key is API gateway application name. So here is API gateway application name. From here it will pick this name. Then we have got a Eureka client service URL default zone, that it will be picking up detail from here, and it is again coming, values are coming from the config map, right? So Eureka client service URL default zone, so the value is coming from here, default zone. So it is going to take the TS Eureka server service and 8761, right? So now we have defined a deployment object. Now we will define a service object. Service object is similar to the other service object we already have created. So kind is service API version v1, and the name is ticket service API gateway and the service. Okay, and the selector is TS API gateway. This is the same as the selector we have used in the deployment object, and internal port is 8765 and target port is 8765. So now this is all we need for the API gateway deployment and service manifest files. So let us deploy this kubectl apply -f, and this is the 5th number property YAML file. So now I think I need to create the another command prompt. So I have opened the another command prompt. So now let us deploy API gateway into the Kubernetes. kubectl get pods, and now the API gateway also got registered with the also got deployed. I can check the services. So RV service also got deployed, and let us go to the browser and check it. It's appearing into the Eureka server or not. Just give me a second. Okay, now we are able to see that ticket service API gateway got registered with a Eureka server. So we have successfully deployed 3 microservices into the Kubernetes. In the next video, we will explore deploying some more microservices. And thank you for watching this video.